These past few years, we've lost a lot of people of color, particularly Black Americans, many due to the brutality of police officers around the country. Many of these police officers are often found to be not guilty, which has led to a public outrage and an increase in social justice advocacy. But what else can be done? How can we influence social change in a way that's both effective and efficient? And how do those of us who identify as activists take better care of ourselves? Today, I'm joined by two community organizers, Akua Gyamerah and Stephanie Chrispin, as well as a doctoral candidate in criminal justice, Shirley Leyro. First of all, let's talk a little bit about your work. Tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do, as well as what you think are some of the more pressing issues of our time. Shirley, would you like to start?
Well, I'm a full-time instructor over at Borough of Manhattan Community College, and I'm also a PhD student. And my study, it focuses on immigration, in particular deportation, and how it affects the lives of anyone who's deportable. So that's undocumented and documented folks. Anyone who's not a citizen is deportable. And so I look at how being vulnerable to deportation affects them and how that in turn affects the community.
Right.
And so for me, it's immigration is like the pressing issue, immigration reform.
Immigration is a huge issue of our time, something that a lot of our presidential candidates are talking about. And so I definitely think that there is much more awareness that's happening with immigration. But at the same time, a lot of people still have a lot of stereotypes about immigration and false notions of what immigration issues really are about. Akua, would you like to tell me about yourself?
Yes, so I am an activist around anti-police brutality and anti-racist organizing. I organize with Millions March New York City, which is the group that organized the December 13th march that brought out 60,000 people to protest the non-indictment of the officer who killed Eric Garner, as well as Mike Brown, the officers who killed those two innocent Black men. And so we've been organizing the last 7 months around a number of issues, including in solidarity with Baltimore, as well as Sandra Bland and Khalif Browder. So that's
and that's probably the biggest thing happening, at least in our lives and in the community. We're seeing so many people of color, particularly Black men, who are being killed, and even Black women by the excessive force of police, and hopefully that awareness has risen as well. However, I think that there are still a lot of people that are resistant to talking about that or open to even understanding that there might be biases that police have which lead to this sort of behavior that are empirically based. We have studies that show a lot about police bias and how that affects the way they treat people, but yet people aren't talking about it. But Stephanie, how about you? Tell me about yourself.
Well, I currently work in the philanthropic sector doing public policy work and bringing more identity and diversity into the sector and how to create that pipeline of social sector leaders. And I also am the vice president for UniPro, which is a Filipino-American organization, predominantly students and young professionals. And a lot of the work that we do is around community organizing and civic engagement. Our last summit was around this issue of solidarity, right? So I'm half Filipino, so I care about things a little bit and have a different perspective on things than some of my full Filipino friends and those who are Filipino American, especially in light of Black Lives Matter. It's where do Filipinos fall within that movement, and how can we show power with, not power over, and how do we become better allies without discounting the voices of the people directly impacted by this. So a lot of the work that I like to do is bridging the gaps, not only across generations, but across multiple people of color. So we did a solidarity panel at our last summit where we invited members of different communities to discuss organizing within their communities and how we can organize together.
Right, and that brings up a really good point, is that a lot of people don't know how to organize. A lot of people don't know how to be more active in protest or even just in educating others. And I wonder if you all have some thoughts or advice on how can we get more people to be more active and more socially aware. Shirley, any thoughts?
Well, I do tell my students that just by virtue of their affiliation with the university, they can start student clubs, and then they get funded, and so they can go out into their communities and start events. And then I try to tell them to try to get some type of cooperation with the churches, because the churches are very involved, particularly the Catholic Church. they have the Catholic Migration Office, which works very closely with the immigrant communities around the churches. But not just the Catholic Church, just any church. So for my students in particular, I say you have a unique opportunity to start these groups and get involved, go out into the community and just get the word out, because they're students, because they have these affiliations within the university, and CUNY is huge. They can pretty much get their voices heard pretty widely around the city.
Right, and I think that's a big part of it, is starting with educating people young, that young people, students, to get them involved in different ways. But I think at the same time, a lot of times students and other people feel that that their voices won't be heard. So what do we do in those sorts of situations? Akua, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question you raised, and I think it's something that activists are really grappling with right now. How do we actually expand our movement? How do we build base? How do we get more people involved? It's very clear, based on the outpour of anger on the streets, that people are very much livid around the reality of racism in the U.S., especially Black youth who have to deal with it day in and day out. And people are drawing connections between mass incarceration, education, healthcare, etc. And so, as movement activists, our job is to figure out how are our actions creating more space for people to get involved? Right. Will this, direct action actually isolate us, or will it bring in more people, right? In addition to putting pressure on those in power who we want to make change. So I think it's a really important question, and something that all our strategy and tactics should be involved in. How do we get more people involved? Because without that, if we don't build a mass movement rooted in communities, workplace, our schools, we will not win any of our demands. And so that is the key question. Sure. How do we expand our impact, and how do we win more people to this struggle? Right. So I think, to answer your question, because I feel like I didn't, to answer it, I think it means creating organizations that can keep us together in the ups and downs of this movement, because this is going to be a long-term struggle. We're just in the beginning stages of it, but creating organizations, creating spaces, and training new layers of activists who are now getting involved in order to really sustain ourselves and grow.
And I'm hearing a couple things. I think one, it's getting people involved who are directly affected or impacted by systemic racism and homophobia and transphobia and sexism and all that stuff. And then those who don't have to deal with those realities, so allies or people who self-identify as allies but might not actually be. And then those who just don't even think that this is even a problem. People who say that systemic racism, what is that? We have a Black president. We have, all these opportunities for people of color. Why are you so angry? So what do we do with both of those groups, those that are not involved, and then maybe those that just don't think anything exists? Stephanie, thoughts?
Well, for me, I've learned that start with the low-hanging fruit. You always want to engage the people who have expressed sympathy and solidarity with you, right? First, you start with okay, you say you show solidarity with us. Okay, so then come to our meetings. You try to find links between their experience and experiences of other people of color, people who are gender nonconforming, people who are of different sexual backgrounds. So, for example, when we were doing our solidarity panels around Black Lives Matter, what we did was try to show links between how the Black liberation is inherently tied to that of Filipino liberation, right? And how anti-Black racism poisons our ability to break the bonds of that anti-colonialist movement that we're trying to build.
Sure. Right. So bringing connections for different communities, showing them that even if you don't think you're directly impacted, that it's all related and interrelated. Other thoughts, Akua or Shirley?
Yeah, I think that's a big struggle. How do we win people over to the struggle against racism? I really agree with the low-hanging fruit. You have to start with the people who already won over to it. Yeah. But we also have to, unfortunately, because of the reality of racism and mixed consciousness, that a lot of working class people have due to, we're inundated with it in the media, right? And so it means doing a lot of education, being visible visible in the streets, being, doing tablings, having panels and community meetings. It's through the process of really putting out our politics and engaging in conversations with people that our ideas start to change. And that can be frustrating. It's not easy. And I would say it's not a safe space to be in as organizers. There's no safe space for organizing, because once you commit yourself to that, we're going to have to, confront a lot of ideas that trigger us. But our goal is to change it and to win people over, to transform society. So I would say that's what I would say.
Yeah, and then I was thinking about just social media and the impact of social media of not necessarily changing people's lives or minds, but maybe exposing them to different thoughts and different ideas. But then others say that social media is exhausting because you post something and then you have some friends who agree with you, and then you have that one dissenting voice who writes something completely racist or off, and then that affects your friendship. So what are your thoughts on engaging people who don't agree with you, that they might not necessarily ever change their minds? Should we continue with that?
I think that for purposes of self-care, you can engage until a point, like set limitations on it, because you don't want to, psychologically damage yourself during an interaction. I know this happens to me a lot on Facebook. So a lot of the time I'm just providing materials. Here's further reading. I understand that you aren't going to agree with me, but this is the argument, and here's the research supporting this argument, and you can interpret it the way you want.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up self-care, because I think that's one of the most important things that I've noticed that we as activists might not do a lot of is self-care. I know that during the Black Lives Matter start and during the Eric Garner verdict, that people, including myself, were on the streets every single night, but yet perhaps we weren't psychologically checking in with ourselves and making sure that we were taking care of ourselves. So I think that that's the next step as well, is to not only reach out to others, but to also do so in a way where we are taking care of ourselves. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for a very engaging discussion, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.